Okey guys, bertemu kembali di channel YouTube saya bobbytaf. Kali ini saya akan membuat satu reaction tentang geografi now Indonesia. Saya jujur guys, saya tak tahu apa maksudnya video ni tentang dia, apa dia ceritakan. Maksudnya video ni siapa, macam orang ni pun saya tak pernah dengar. Saya pun tak pernah dengar lagi channel ni. Tapi ini adalah salah satu suggestion daripada saya punya viewer dan untuk dia suruh saya buat reaction guys. Jadi tanpa kita buang masa guys, kita let's go to the video. Okay, guys, let's go.
Basically, all you have to know is that it's kind of like the Hawaii of the Muslim world, but it's like huge. It's like the biggest state with orangutans.
Oh,
That's it. Just no punchline. Just go to the intro song.
It's time to learn geography.
Now! Hey everybody, I'm your host Barbie. So as some of you know, I've been to Indonesia one time on one island for like 3 hours. I ate one dish, so basically I'm like the Indonesia expert, right? Well, if not, I'm kind of like the only guy on YouTube doing full profile videos like this. So for now, you'll just have to kind of deal with me for like the next 12 or so minutes. Woohoo! Default!
Mungkin guys, video ni dia menceritakan tentang maksudnya di Indonesia guys, culture ke apa ke, tentang haiwan-haiwan ke guys. Saya pun teringat juga nak tahu guys di Indonesia ni macam mana guys. Jadi kita tengok aja macam mana kan.
So again, if you don't know anything about Indonesia, it's basically like if the Middle East and South Asia had an incredibly colorful, loud, somewhat explosive set of babies, like thousands of them. This would really help. First of all, Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago nation, located right where the Indian Ocean meets the Pacific Ocean on the incredibly clustered set of islands, making 6 countries known commonly as Nusantara or the Malay Archipelago. Indonesian Archipelago. Sure, Indonesia actually has land borders with 3 of these countries: East Timor, Papua New Guinea, and Malaysia, on the biggest island, Borneo or Kalimantan, which is one of the world's only 2 triple split nation islands, the other one being Cyprus. Although technically, if you include the UN buffer zone, it's kind of like 4 entities, but the UN is a country, whatever, just watch the Cyprus episode. The country is divided into 34 provinces, 5 of which have special administrative
Tapi Indonesia memang besar guys. Indonesia memang besar guys.
Located on Java, the world's most populous island with nearly half
Java tu
the
Jawa
population
kan.
of Indonesia. In it, the largest cities after Jakarta are Surabaya and Bandung, both located on Java Island, and Medan, located on Sumatra. Jakarta Soekarno Hatta International, Bali's Ngurah Rai International in Despansar, and Surabaya's Juanda International. Now here's where things get a little speculative. Today there are still arguments
Tapi guys,
about
saya
how
nak
many islands Indonesia had.
Tapi guys, jujur saya nak terangkan sikit. Sebenarnya dia nak cakap, saya nak translatekan sikit. Tapi dia cakap pun laju guys. Saya Inggeris pun tak adalah apa sangat. Saya setakat faham gitu je guys. Jadi saya harap ada subtitle ni korang pun boleh faham. Dan saya just buat reaction guys. Sebab saya pun dia cakap laju sangat guys. Saya nak cakap nanti.
The National Coordinating Agency for Surveying and Mapping says Indonesia has about 13,500. The National Institute of Aeronautics and Space Agency says that it has about 18,300, whereas the Indonesian government claims about 17,500. But whatever the point is, there's a lot of them. Over 8,800 have names and over 900 of them are permanently inhabited. You would think they are the country with the most islands, but surprisingly Finland and Canada beat them. But a lot of their islands are kind of like little islands in the lakes, so it doesn't really count. I guess. Now let's talk about the 5
tapi
special
Indonesia guys,
administrative
pulau-pulau
provinces.
dia
They
lawa
are
guys.
Aceh, Yogyakarta, West Papua and Papua, and the capital Jakarta. Now, no surprise, the capital Jakarta acts as its own political entity. Lots of countries do that. But what about the others? First, Aceh. Aceh is kind of like the black sheep of Indonesia. It's the only province in which Sharia law is fully implemented. Also, they kind of have like a ton of oil, so yeah, they have kind of a very independent ideology that sets them apart as autonomous from the rest of Indonesia. Then you have Yogyakarta, which is the only region that is still governed by a pre-colonial monarchy. The Sultan of Yogyakarta, who acts as a hereditary governor. Otherwise, we get the 2 Papuas, which collectively used to be the province called Irian Jaya, but then in 2003 they got split into 2. Basically, this is the place that has the least in common with the rest of Indonesia. It has a culture and background closer to their cousins across the border in Papua New Guinea. So then why is this part of Indonesia? Well, long story short, Indonesia was basically like, well, now that we have our full sovereignty, we get everything that the Dutch colonized. But the people of Papua were not too happy, so then Indonesia was like, alright, we'll give you a vote to stay or leave. However, we would strongly implore you to make the right decision. So they voted to stay in. A lot of people complained. There's still some current opposition, and to this day, the area has a relatively high level of autonomy, and the government kind of just leaves them alone, except for when it comes to mining for resources. Oh, and the South Maluku area also kind of has like an independence dispute thing kind of going on, but the major opponents to the Indonesian government are primarily based in the Netherlands. Then you have the strange Riau Islands, which which look like they should
wow.
belong to
Yeah,
Malaysia,
well.
but they don't, even though they have a strong Malay-derived culture. Then you have the Ambalat C block, which has a ton of oil that both they and Malaysia argue over. So that essentially covers most of the administrative divisions of Indonesia. Some of the most notable spots of interest in Indonesia might include the National Monument and Museum, Royal Keraton Yogyakarta Palace, Ratu Boko, the Magelang and chicken-shaped churches, Borobudur, disputed to be the largest Buddhist temple in the world,
tempat-tempat
Maimun
sejarah dia.
Palace, the Taman Sari Underground Mosque, the Equator Monument, the Pura Ulun Danu Bratan Lake Temples. Yeah, try to say that 5 times fast. Pura Ulun Danu Batan Lake. The Millennium Bridge, the Sacred Monkey Temple, the Hellmouth or Elephant
tempat-tempat
Cave,
sejarah
7-story
dia ni.
pagoda of Cebu, the smoked mummy villages of
tu
Aikim
kat
and
Malaysia.
Chiwika in Papua. Or if you're lazy, you can just go to the Taman Mini Indonesia Indah Park, which
Taman
kind of has
Mini.
like a bunch of replicas of all the famed sites in Indonesia. Oh, and keep in mind, there's Dutch colonial style buildings all over, too many ancient temples and pagodas to list. And no matter how many buildings and landmarks are built, they will never compare to what Mother Nature has done. Which brings
Betul.
us to
Betul. Nature tu datang tu kan. Betul.
Indonesia's land is like that one ex we all had back in our 20s that we trusted a stupid friend to hook us up with. Super attractive, but almost killed you a few times. Indonesia lies on what is labeled as the prehistoric continental shelf known as Sundaland, which during the Ice Age times pretty much connected all of the islands together before the Wallace Line
Sundaland.
until the ice melted and filled in the gaps. Now this is where things get incredibly messed up. Not only is Indonesia right in the worst part of the Ring of Fire, but the country is basically smashed between 3 converging major continental plates.
okay.
The Eurasian, the Pacific, and the Australian plates, with dozens of minor plates and rifts like the Sunda, Timor, Banda, Molucca, and so on. This in return gives Indonesia over 400 volcanoes, disputably
betul.
more than any in the world, with over
The
150
volcano dia
active ones,
teruk
making it
kat
the most
Indonesia.
volcanically active country in the world as well.
150,
This means on a daily basis, Indonesia experiences on average about 4 earthquakes a day, ranging anywhere between the small, timid 3 to a noticeable 6 on the Richter scale. And you never know where or when they will happen.
Philippines.
Impressive. Nonetheless, volcanoes can be a good thing, especially when concentrated close to the equator, as the warmer,
Volcano,
humid
guys.
climate allows moisture and minerals to
Baik, Malaysia
coalesce,
tak ada,
creating
guys.
some of the most fertile land on the
By
planet.
the way, saya harap anda kata korang-korang yang ada gempa bumi, saya harap korang selamat guys Semoga kita selamat-selamat selalu guys.
This is why places like Hawaii and Iceland are so radically different despite both being volcanic islands. In the end, Indonesia got blessed with a flourishing abundance of flora and fauna, the second highest concentration in the world after Brazil, many of which being endemic species like the Rafflesia
Brazil nombor
arnoldi
1.
and the Titan arum, the largest flowers in the world, which each smell like rotting corpses. And at over 180,
Bangkai.
they also have the highest concentration of mammals out of anywhere in the world. Nonetheless, the national animal is actually a reptile, the largest in the world at 3 meters long, the famous Komodo dragon, which you can find a bunch of on Komodo Island, which is where they get their name from, and they can kill people. Just a heads up. And the surprisingly not national animal, even though everybody knows and loves them, the only great ape in Asia, orangutans, are only found on this archipelago.
Saya pelik betul loh orang negara ni suka main orang utin. Sebenarnya sebutan dia orang hutan. Apa susah sangat. Ya,
As
betul.
well. By the way,
Slang
they
lah,
look
slang.
docile and quiet, but orangutans can rip off your arm if you
Hutan.
anger them. So don't. Otherwise, the largest mountain, Puncak Jaya,
Dia
is
boleh
located
pecahkan
in the
tangan gitu
east
kan?
in Papua. The longest river, the Kapuas, flows on Kalimantan, or Borneo Island, starting in the east, emptying into the South China Sea. The largest lake, as well as the largest volcanic lake in the world, Lake Toba, can be found on Sumatra. This is also the
Toba
site
Lake.
of the largest speculated volcanic explosive eruption on Earth that essentially created a worldwide volcanic winter. The eruption was so big that you can literally observe ashes from the explosion that went as far as Malawi in East Africa. Remember, guys, Mother Nature is beautiful, but if she wants, she can.
By the way guys, saya minta maaf kalau saya punya reaction tak terlalu banyak guys. Maksudnya saya bercakap kurang sebab saya nak fahamkan dia bercakap guys. Sebab dia cakap dah laju. Lepas tu ini adalah sejarah-sejarah Indonesia dan tempat-tempat menarik Indonesia. Jadi saya tinggal nak tahu. Jadi saya kalau saya terangkan pun nanti saya bersekabut. Jadi maafkan saya.
And kill you. Close to Puncak Jaya is Grasberg, the largest gold and copper mine in the world. And on Mount Ijen on Java, which spews out blue lava, all over you can find intrepid sulfur miners that literally go into the base of the volcanic craters, risking health just to get raw sulfur ores. Otherwise, you have other anomalies like the Sidoarjo mud volcanoes, the 3-colored lake Kelimutu in Flores, and the Kakaban Island jellyfish lake. Too many strange places. To this day, Indonesia is the #1 producer of palm oil, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, coconut, and vanilla. Some national dishes might include things like rendang, satay, or satay, gado-gado,
Satay.
lontong, ketupat, papeda, ikan bakar, pempek,
bakar.
tumpeng,
Lapar.
lemang, and the national dish nasi goreng, which basically just means fried rice, which has no exact recipe. You can mix it up and kind of do whatever you want to it. Oh, and keep in mind, Malaysia might argue that some of these dishes belong to them, but that's a whole other story tied in with history and culture. We got time. Why not talk about it? Now, there's a lot of
Demographic.
curious mysteries when it comes to Indonesia's people. Like, how did they become predominantly Muslim? Or what's the whole deal with them in Malaysia? Or wait, this guy is considered an Indonesian? What? First of all, the country has about 263 million people, making it the
ramai.
fourth most populous country in the world, with the largest population of Muslims as well. Now, here's the
Oh,
thing. In a
bagus.
sense, yes, 95% of the population is considered native Indonesian. But that's an incredibly broad term, considering that Indonesia has about 300 different ethno-linguistic groups split up across all the island regions of the country. If you look at a map with the actual ethnic group breakdown, it kind of looks something like this. Nonetheless, the two largest parent ethnic groups are the Javanese, that make up about 40%, the Sundanese, that make up about 15%. Otherwise, the rest of the population is primarily made up of smaller groups and tribes that have only around 2 to 3% each, like the Batak, the Sulawesi,
Jawa,
Balinese,
Sundan, 15%,
Minangkabau, Betawi,
58
Papuan,
orang normal.
Dayak, and so on. Finally, about 5% are non-indigenous Indonesians, like Chinese, Arabs, Indians, and even a few Europeans. They also use the Indonesian rupiah as their currency, they use the Type-C plug outlet, and they drive on the left side of the road. And here's where things get a little confusing. Culture and language. The one thing that
Sama
kind of
lah dengan
unites all
Malaysia.
Indonesians is that they share the national language Bahasa Indonesia, which means the Indonesian language. However, Bahasa Indonesia is actually kind of like a lingua franca to many of the people, as Indonesia is the world's largest trilingual country. In addition to Bahasa Indonesia, most people speak their own mother tongue as well as English. Yep, English. They caught on quick when they realized it was the money language. The funny thing is, even though the Javanese make up the largest people group, the Javanese language is not an official language. Technically, it could have been, but then that would have favored one people group over all the others, which would have caused tension. So they kind of had to choose like a neutral default. Plus, Javanese is like really hard to learn, and the
Oi,
original
betul,
writing
betul.
system,
Susah nak
although
faham
very
Jawa, guys.
beautiful, is incredibly difficult.
Malaysia pun ada Jawa
Nonetheless,
juga,
at
kan?
nearly 100 million speakers, this makes Javanese the largest non-official minority language in the world. And that's why the Bahasa Indonesia language is so strange. It's not even technically indigenous to Indonesia, but more Malay-derived. To this day,
betul, betul.
people who speak Bahasa Indonesia can understand somewhere around 60 to 70% of what their neighbors are
Betul,
saying
betul,
in
fakta,
Malaysia.
fakta.
The biggest difference, though, would be the loan words, as Indonesia took quite a bit of
Itu benda fakta guys. Malaysia ni, Indonesia ni bila bercakap kita masih boleh faham guys. Tapi bila Malaysia masuk ke Jawa guys, sebab Malaysia pada Jawa guys. Macam mak saya ni orang Jawa. Bila dia bercerita dengan kaum-kaum dia, tak faham guys.
influence from the Dutch back in colonial times. For example, kantor versus kantor, dokter
Kantor.
versus dokter, mantel, mantel,
Oh,
oma,
dia sama dengan
opa,
des.
wortel, wortel. Speaking of the Dutch, quick history lesson. Hindu kingdoms, Buddhist kingdoms, Islamic kingdoms. The Portuguese come in quickly, but then the Dutch flock in. Japan comes in for a couple of years and decimates a huge chunk of the population. Independence, Republic, the Suharto years.
Controversial incidents and fights with ethnic Chinese, Timorese, and Papuan peoples. Suharto falls, Reformation period begins, and here we are today.
In Indonesia, all citizens are required to register under one of 6 recognized religion
Yeah,
categories:
Catholic.
Islam, Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, and Confucianism.
Oh,
If you don't
enam
identify
pilihan.
with either, then sorry. Prior to Islam entering around the 13th century, Indonesia was actually primarily Hindu and Buddhist. It's disputed on how exactly Indonesia became prevalently Muslim. Some people will say that it's because of the Arab traders that came by in the early first millennium. Others will say that maybe it had to do with the Malacca Sultanate conquest that fought against the Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms. And the truth is, both might be right. Inevitably, Bali became like the last sort of haven for whatever Hindus were left. The eastern Nusa Tenggara region and the Papuas remained predominantly Christian, as the Dutch and Portuguese shared the
Christian, eh?
gospel. Islamic culture in Indonesia is a little different from what it looks like in the Middle East. For one, most mosques don't have the typical dome structure, and actually many of them resemble Hindu temples, like the Demak Great Mosque. When a family member dies, their relatives might often come together and pray for a whole week, and then again on the 40th day, and then on the year anniversary, and then on the 500th day, and so on. Also, the night before Eid al-Fitr, the youth might gather and go around neighborhoods reciting the takbir. Those are some things you don't really typically
Jadi betul-betul. Apa perkara yang orang Indonesia buat seperti macam yang dia cakap tadi tu lebih kurang juga di Malaysia guys. Kita punya cara apa macam Islam kita sama. Tapi maksudnya budaya kita berbeza dengan orang Middle East. Macam contohnya tu orang Arab. Itu fakta guys.
find in the Middle East. Clothing modesty customs are pretty loose. Not all Muslim women wear hijabs. However, the ones that do might also complement it with Western clothing, like branded t-shirts with skin-tight sleeves and jeans. When I was in Indonesia, I saw a hijab-wearing woman with short sleeves and capri pants exposing her calves. I was like, can they do that? Now, in terms of culture, again, it depends on where you are, and many
Itu
indigenous
kalau untuk Islamik tu itu mostly kepada orang-orang dia sendiri guys. Orang itu cara nak pemakaian kan. Tapi dalam Islam memang pakaian dia kena tutup lutut tu semua. Tapi dia pergi segi cara pakai ketat apa semua benda tu yang benda kau nampak boleh ke dia buat macam ni, itu adalah dia orang yang buat sendiri kan. Itu wallahu alam.
People still follow ancient traditions. Everything from the Minangkabau candle dance to the gamelan players of
Minangkabau,
Yogyakarta, Wayang Javanese shadow puppetry, Balinese festivals, Sumatran pencak silat martial art tournaments, Kenya motif paintings of the Kalimantan tribes, the deadly pasola game played by Sumba peoples, Karabeng cow racing on Madura Island, the strange burial traditions of the Toraja people, and everywhere you can find those pointy longhouses. Otherwise, some notable people of Indonesian descent might include people like the first president Sukarno, Gadamaja, R.A. Kartini, B.J. Habibie, Iko Uwais, Yayan Ruhian, Sesep Arif Rahman, Agnes Monica, Iwan Fals, Anggun, Megawati Sukarno Putri, the Hartono brothers, and YouTubers Brian Emanuel and Raditya Dika. Now, it's so hard to cover Indonesia's culture because there's so many different people groups, each with their own cultures. It's insanely colorful and rich. I wish we could cover more, but we gotta move on to some diplomatics, shall we? Okay, so Indonesia is basically like the kingpin of Southeast Asia with the largest population and economy, as well as being a member of the G20. Therefore, they know how to manage relations. First of all, the rest of the Muslim nations in the Middle East generally get along with Indonesia as they see them as kind of like their strange Asian cousins. Indonesians make up the largest group of pilgrims for the Hajj in Mecca. However, there has been some controversy with Saudi Arabia in regards to migrant worker abuse and death sentences. Since then, Indonesia dramatically decreased its expat programs. The US, the Netherlands, and Australia are kind of like their biggest non-Asian supporters. In addition to trade and business, the US played a huge role in Indonesia's independence, and they worked closely during Cold War times. The Netherlands still holds close ties to Indonesia despite post-colonial bitterness. Plus, tons of Indonesians live in the Netherlands. To this day, they have the second largest population of Indonesians outside of Indonesia after Malaysia at nearly 2 million. Australia gives some of the most aid to Indonesia, especially after catastrophe incidents. And even though there are some controversies involving immigration and attacks on Australians abroad, they still share close ties generally. Now, Indonesia and Malaysia are kind of like the Colombia and Venezuela of Southeast Asia. They're like the twins separated at birth and have a strange love-hate relationship. Malays accuse Indonesians of stealing their culture and language. Indonesians accuse them of not being grateful for all their help during war times. But when they actually meet up as people, it's like they're totally brothers. Nonetheless, most Indonesians I talk to have said Japan is probably their best friend, which is funny because Japan kind of really messed things up during World War II. Nonetheless, they've moved on, and today Japan makes up the largest export partner. Tourists flock in year-round, and the two have been building each other up for over half a century. In conclusion, Indonesia's people are very much like their islands, numerous with lush, colorful, strange diversity. Sometimes a cyclone, earthquake, or volcano of controversy erupts, but at the end of the day, they still flourish together as one. Stay tuned, Iran is coming up next.
Okay guys, sampai sini je lah video saya kali ni guys, tentang reaction tentang geografi now Indonesia guys. Jadi saya minta maaf guys kat anda kata kalau korang rasa macam apa ni reaction tak banyak sangat bercakap, tak banyak sangat react dia. Sebab dia orang yang video yang dia terangkan ni terlalu laju guys. Jadi saya kena slow untuk baca, dan ada benda banyak yang dia cerita juga ada yang saya tak faham sangat. Sebab saya tak terlalu mahir dalam bahasa Inggeris guys, dan saya tak sempat nak menceritakan kat orang apa yang dia cakap sebab dia cakap terlalu laju guys. Jadi saya pun minta maaf kan, dia kata kalau korang rasa macam apa reaction macam ni. Sebab saya pun masih tak faham, sebab saya masih tak tahu lagi tentang culture Indonesia guys. Jadi saya pun tengah tahu. Jadi mau pada saya banyak tengok dan saya react sikit-sikit guys. Jadi saya rasa ni bukan saya rasa kan. Dia kata kalau korang nak buat saya, bukan nak buat saya, kalau dia kata korang nak saya reaction tentang video dia, korang jangan lupa komen di bawah guys. Korang komen di bawah, insya-Allah saya akan buat reaction tentang video yang korang nak tengok guys. Sampai sini je lah video saya kali ini guys. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, apa-apa saja guys. Assalamualaikum and peace.